And welcome back to the Clear Jets podcast. We're hosts Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, from our last podcast, I guess a lot has happened. By the same token, nothing has really happened, as Aaron Rodgers is still not officially the Jets quarterback, but he fully intends on being the New York Jets quarterback. Obviously, that news broke on Wednesday on the Pat McAfee show. A big moment. I don't think I can fully breathe a sigh of relief until the trade has been agreed upon. We were waiting to do a podcast until the compensation was announced, but who knows how long that'll take, so we'll just stick with our Monday schedule here. I'll start with this, Michael. When you first heard the news that he fully intends, I was going to say the official news, but the unofficial news that Aaron Rodgers is going to be the Jets quarterback, I mean, how did you react? Take us through it.
Well, I mean, going into this thing, I kind of equated it to the second coming of the moon landing, just everyone in the country gathered around their screens watching this historic moment. And it kind of was like that. I mean, what was it? Over 400,000 people simultaneously watching that on the Pat McAfee show, which is pretty wild for anything on YouTube, just a sports podcast like that. So I knew it was going to be big. I gathered around my computer screen with my dad about as soon as the interview was supposed to start at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I forget what it was, but and it was, they had the timer up there. It was like Aaron Rodgers Wednesday, and it was counting down. It was like, this is going to be so big. Then he gets into it, and I started to get a little nervous because going into it, I did have some skepticism. Like, is he just going to come on here and give us some, cookie cutter answers and say, it's a process, I don't really know yet, things like that. But at the same time, I thought there's no reason he would come on here to do anything other than say something concrete at this specific time.
Although when he had one sentence where he started out where he was like, today's not a decision. And I was like, oh my God.
Right. And then when he got into it, I think my fears were kind of starting to come into fruition because he said that. And I was like, oh, great, here we go. But then he started building up. He's like, and I started working out and ramping up, and my intention was to play, and my intention is to play for the New York Jets. And then I just flipped out,
man.
And it was great. So it was just that weight off the shoulders, and it's still not fully off. It's almost like there was 1,000 pounds on my shoulders. Now there's only 10. So
10. Some of the texts I got from you yesterday, I would say it's about 500 still. There's still a part of you. You're still a scarred New York Jets fan. You can't celebrate until they're officially in the end zone. But it does feel like they're on the 1 yard line and it's 1st and goal. But if you watch the AFC,
they already scored the touchdown. They're just reviewing it.
That's true. I was going to make the comparison to the AFC Championship in 2010. They're on the 1 yard line. They have 4 tries. Please, Brian Schottenheimer, don't run it up the middle 4 times in a row. It does seem like it should happen, but I agree with you. It is a little nerve-wracking. Like, you don't want to jinx anything, but we'll hop into it all. But the Jets want it to happen. The Packers want it to happen. Aaron Rodgers wants it to happen. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how much the Jets give up. So there's a lot to hop in. I know this week there's been a lot of talk about leverage. I'm sure all Jets fans are sick of that word. I know half of them have it muted on Twitter. We'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, the Jets made some other smaller moves. Our last podcast, we'd already talked about Chuck Clark and Alan Lazard. We can talk about them a little bit more, but they made 2 moves on the O-line. And then, there's just there's plenty of holes remaining on this team that they can fill this week. So there's plenty to talk about, but we'll start with Rodgers. Obviously, when he said those words, beyond excited. And it was so cool to see the Jets, just to see how far they've come, especially under Joe Douglas. That's not to say that Douglas hasn't made his fair share of mistakes as GM of the New York Jets, but when you look at the roster he inherited in 2019 to the roster that he's going to put out in the field in 2023, it's pretty great stuff. And when you just think about having, like you said, I think it was close to 500,000. I think it got up to 498. I could be wrong, but almost 500,000 people watching live, watching one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, saying he wants to go play for the New York Jets. That was just some special stuff. So I guess going back to what I was saying earlier, the vaunted term leverage, Michael, who has it here? I mean, I know the national media is pushing that the Packers do. Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers seem to think the Jets do. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. How do you feel about this whole situation? And when do you ultimately feel like this gets resolved? Hopefully sometime soon for the sake of our health.
I just want it to be over. That's how I feel. I'm trying to get on the same page with you. I mean, I was kind of ranting to you a few days ago. I was like, I want this to be over. Is this even going to happen? And then you're like, I can't take that negative energy.
Yeah,
And
stop.
that's kind of what I'm trying to embody here. I'm just trying to ignore it. I think I'm one of those Jets fans that have muted this word on Twitter, and I'm just going to operate as if Rodgers is the Jets quarterback and wait patiently until we get the resolution, which hopefully is sooner rather than later. But yeah, I guess to break it down a little bit, I think the fairest way to look at it is to say both sides have their own elements of leverage here. You know, the Packers know the Jets don't have any other options, realistically speaking. And the Jets know that Rodgers has publicly proclaimed he's essentially done with the Packers. The Packers have said as much, through what their public comments speaking about him in the past tense. So, um, yeah, it seems like both sides are motivated to get this done, wanted to get it done, or all three sides is really the way it should be looked at.
Right.
And I think it's going to get done at some point. But both sides have reasons to say, well, hold up now. We don't have to give in to what you're offering because we have some time here to work this thing out. And we know there are reasons that we can kind of hold this over you for a little bit. But I think the deadline that I'm looking at, and I think you agree, but you give your comments as well. I think it's the draft. I don't
Yeah.
see this going past the draft because if you're Green Bay, and you're trading one of the greatest players in the history of your franchise, or in his opinion, potentially the greatest, as he said. Um, I think you want to get draft compensation for this year. Do you really want to trade Aaron Rodgers and wait until next season to start reaping the rewards of trading him when you have a guy in Jordan Love taking over who you want to help as much as possible? Um, and then in addition to that, the Jets obviously are coming off a 7-win season. They have a high pick in the second round, high picks throughout the rest of the draft, top half of each round. And you look forward to next year with Aaron Rodgers coming in. Most likely those picks are going to be much lower, much less valuable in each round. Do you really want to risk getting past this draft and getting less valuable picks? Not only picks that aren't in this year's draft, but also picks that are less valuable next year because the Jets are likely going to be a better team. So I don't see this going past the draft. Maybe does this thing drag out into April as these teams continue to take as much time as they can to try and get the other one to bite, to give in, potentially. But I have a hard time seeing it go past the draft. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like for the last 2 weeks we've been saying, "All right, it should happen any day now," and then it hasn't happened already. I feel like it'll happen this week, but as I just said, I mean, it could drag out. We don't really know. But yeah, I think the one thing to consider with the Packers, like you said, is definitely the draft. There is the argument to be made if they wait until after June 1st, they save some money because they don't have to eat his entire $40 million cap hit in 1 year. If they trade him after June 1st, they can spread that out over 2 years, and that creates just under $25 million in cap for them to work with this year. So there's some advantage for the Packers to wait, but let's just be honest. The optics of holding one of the best players in your franchise history hostage for months, where he's publicly unhappy and wants to be a New York Jet, and like you said, passing up on helping out Jordan Love this year, passing out on higher picks presumably this year, it just doesn't make much sense. It seems like the sticking point likely is the fact that the Packers want the Jets' first round pick this year. If
And
I had
quickly
to guess,
before we get into the compensation, I want to touch on something you just said. I think that optics part of it is really important here because this is like you just said, one of the greatest players in the history of the team, and as their I think it was their president, Mark Murphy, in those comments, who was talking about him before Rodgers made the announcement. He said, Rodgers is going to be in our Hall of Fame. We'll welcome him back. And even Rodgers, speaking on McAfee, was had a lot of praise for Packers fans and Green Bay and all the history he had there, but it's rocky waters right now. He did go out publicly and give a very harsh criticism of the way he was treated by this franchise
and the way they've
and
treated other vets.
the way they treated other vets. So it's going down a bad path to where, this is a few more bad moves away from maybe he doesn't come back and do all this stuff post career. And you don't want to get to that point with one of your all time legends. So I think as the Packers drag this out, there is that risk of, truly creating that bad blood with Rodgers that might be hard to repair in the aftermath of his career, which ultimately isn't. I wouldn't say the most important thing because, the number one thing is what you have right now on the field, but that is very important, especially for a franchise like that, that is, very historic, proud organization that values its history in a way more so than a lot of other franchises. So I think that is an important part of this.
Yeah, I think obviously the leverage that the Packers have is just the fact that they know the Jets want him and that Aaron Rodgers is a damn good quarterback. And if they hold out long enough, maybe the Jets get impatient and up their offer. That's possible. But Joe Douglas has proven through his last 4 years that he's a very measured decision maker. And I think he'll play the long game on this one. I don't see it going past the draft, but I do think he's going to be steadfast in his belief that look, is a 39-year-old quarterback who said he was 90% sure he was going to retire after the season worth a first round pick this year? Picking 13? Probably not. The Jets are bidding against themselves. I mean, I think a month ago when we talked about this on the podcast, I thought it was probable that he was going to go for a first, but that was under the assumption that, maybe the Raiders would be in on it, that there would be other teams they'd be competed against. But the Jets, the leverage that they have is they know they're the only team that wants Rodgers. They're the only team that Rodgers wants. Um, I think that it's bad. It's a bad look for the Packers to feel like they're going to get pantsed by Joe Douglas. I think that's probably part of it. I mean, he's made a reputation of fleecing other organizations, and as much as they want to do right by their former quarterback, do they want to give away probably the best, self-proclaimed best player in franchise history away for peanuts? Absolutely not. And I don't think that's what will happen. We were getting into the compensation, and I think 13 is not going to happen in my eyes, but I think the compensation that most people agree is fair. And, knowing Joe Douglas, he's probably offered a fourth rounder and take it or leave it. I think a second rounder this year, a conditional pick next year, based off of how Rodgers plays, that pick might be a third, but, you look at that Brett Favre trade they made in 2008, maybe it's a second if they playoffs, maybe it's a first if they make the Super Bowl. And then, depending on how much money the Packers eat, you could even put a conditional 2025 pick in, uh, depending on if Rodgers plays in 2024. I mean, I think this trade has to be heavily uh, conditional because I think trading for a 39-year-old quarterback who is on the brink of retirement, you might only get him for 1 year. Sure, I would imagine the Jets are going to be a damn good football team this year, but if they don't win the Super Bowl and he retires and you give up a first round pick and then some, and you're eating the cap hit of taking him on, it's not going to look too good. So I think having the conditional in on how he plays, because the other thing is if you trade for him and then he gets injured and he's out for the year and he retires, I mean, the Jets, will end up with egg on their face. So I think a second this year is fair, and then a conditional based off his playing or his performance, and then maybe another conditional in 2025 based off of if he plays. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. It does seem like Corey Davis will be involved in this trade. We didn't even mention the connection he has with Matt LaFleur, given that they overlapped in Tennessee. But we knew that Green Bay was interested in trading for him last year. Packers need another receiver to replace Allen Lazard in that room. He knows the system. It just makes all the sense. And the Jets brought in Lazard themselves. So it seems like Corey Davis will be a part of that package. I know Rich Cimini had floated out, maybe in lieu of a first round pick, they could trade one of these players that maybe the Packers were high on, one of these young players like an Elijah Moore or Jermaine Johnson even. How would you react to that? I mean, I got to be honest. I don't want to give up one of the known commodities the Jets have, especially the two that I just mentioned. I don't think anybody else is on the table that, Packers fans are dreaming of, but I could maybe see an Elijah Moore. I really strongly think it's going to be Corey Davis. Jermaine Johnson could be the one wild card, and Samini floated it out there. It was probably just a guess, but it's worth thinking about. I mean, the trade I laid out with the second and the conditionals and Corey Davis seems to be the consensus. But is there any other package that you might be interested in, or would you be willing to part with a guy like Jermaine Johnson, who hasn't really proven much but has a lot of potential?
I guess I could see one of those guys getting thrown in there, but personally, I wouldn't be a huge fan of that. I'd rather give out the picks. And, maybe that's part of the sticking point. Maybe the Packers do want one of those players, and the Jets, of course, would rather have the, I wouldn't say known commodity, but the guy who they, scouted and liked enough to pick,
Having the system.
whether it's Moore or Johnson, got in the system. So I wouldn't prefer to do that. I'm sure the Jets also wouldn't like to do that and would prefer to give up a pick. So I think the package you laid out makes the most sense and really is fair. And we'll see if the Packers cave into it eventually, because I know there was an article from Albert Breer put it out a couple days ago from Sports Illustrated, and he talked to a couple, I forget if he said GMs or just front office people in the league from other teams, and they basically put out that same package you just mentioned. Second round pick, couple conditional picks. I think he said second round pick and two mid round conditional picks. So you mentioned Davis, maybe he replaces one of those picks. So yeah, I think that's a fair package, and I guess credit to Joe Douglas for not backing down and seeing if the Packers are going to give into that at some point.
The other thing I could see is, the Packers pick 15th in the draft, the Jets pick 13th, maybe a pick swap if they're really dead set on 13. Obviously, that decreases the probability the Jets land one of these top tackles at 13, but you never know. A tackle could still make it to 15. You also don't know what the Jets board looks like, and also if you've learned anything about Joe Douglas, he's going to take the best player available, which is part of the reason, and we'll get into it later, that you want to fill all these holes in free agency so you don't feel pigeonholed into having to take a tackle. I could see a swap for 13 and 15. That would make sense. The other thing that I saw floated out on Twitter, and I believe I want to give credit because it was not my idea. I think it was on a Jet Nation forum. Sorry if whoever wrote it. I'm not going to give credit. I forget. But they mentioned the John Abraham trade that the Jets made in the early 2000s and how the Falcons really wanted a first round pick from the Jets. Or sorry, the Jets wanted a first round pick from the Falcons. Excuse me. But what they did is they just traded down in the draft, picked up some day 2 picks, and then traded that later first round pick to the Jets, which I think they ultimately took Nick Mangold with. So if the Packers are dead set on a first round pick this year, I think it's possible, again, just throwing out other options that other people have already raised, that, all right, you want a first round pick. It's not going to be 13, but, maybe we can trade down to 20, 21, 22, pick up some picks if somebody's interested in moving up that high, and then trade the first. The problem with that is those type of trades normally don't happen until draft night. To go to 13, you don't really know what you're getting. That would be the only complication. I definitely think if the Jets keep at 13, whether the Rodgers trade is done or not, I think a trade back is certainly in the cards for them. But, a team trading from the 20s to the 13 without knowing who's going to be on the board, that might be kind of hard. I think ultimately, like we said, I think it's going to be a second round pick and some conditional picks and Corey Davis. I think that's the thing that makes sense. And hopefully it gets done sooner rather than later. Have you dug into any Aaron Rodgers highlights? Have you or film? Or are you resisting until he's officially a New York Jet? Because I was watching some of Joe Blewett's threads on Twitter, and I was just like, wow, I forgot what a different sport this is when you have a franchise elite quarterback under center.
No, I've dove in. Once we got the announcement once we got the announcement from Rodgers, I definitely said, I'm in now. He's our quarterback. So yeah, I'm
Well, all right,
operating as if he's our guy.
so what do you? I know we've been promising the Rodgers pod. We promise we will get it out there with the Packers film guy who can really break down him and Lazard and Hackett. But without that, based off of what you've watched from Rodgers now, I know you wrote an article this week on Jets X Factor about the routes that he likes, and you've also had the chance to watch more of Alan Lazard. What do you see from Rodgers and how he fits in with this Jets unit, and what he's going to bring?
I think he's a really good fit for some of the weapons the Jets already have, and I posted an article on Jets X Factor that highlighted in terms of the numbers some of his favorite routes to target, specifically during the 3 years he was playing under Hackett. And there are a few things I like here. I think the biggest thing that stands out is he throws a lot of passes into the flat. He likes to dump it off to his running backs. And he got a lot of production in the passing game out of his running backs. And I think that bodes well for the Jets with some of the guys they have with Brees Hall, Zonovan Knight, Michael Carter. These are guys who have shown they can make plays in the flat. So that'll match up pretty well. The flat route was Rodgers' number one most common route thrown compared to the league average. And number two is the go route. So
Yes,
two
finally.
very different types of throws there. He'll be conservative and he'll check it down if that's what the defense gives him, but he'll also take plenty of deep shots. And that's not something we've seen the Jets try a lot in recent years. When they have tried it, we've not seen a lot of accuracy. But Rodgers on the go routes I think he's going to unlock Garrett Wilson here, because Wilson did get quite a few shots last year. They just, the vast majority of them did not
Sailed
get
into the
completed
stands.
because they just sailed into the stands. According to Next Gen Stats, he got 23 go route targets. 4 were completed. That's 17%. So, but you look at Rodgers and what he had going with Devontae Adams during those 3 years with Hackett, 32 of 67 on go routes. That's 46%. The league average is 35%. So just imagine that with Garrett Wilson. We all know what Rodgers' deep balls look like. So much touch, beautiful placement, puts it exactly where it needs to be for the receiver to make an easy catch. I think Garrett Wilson's deep game is going to be unlocked, and it's something we liked when he's coming out of Ohio State. His ability to play above the rim and get vertical and make some of those explosive plays, and it really wasn't a big part of his game last year because of mostly the poor quarterbacking. And he was still so good in spite of that because he's succeeded in other areas. But I think Rodgers is going to unlock that part of Wilson's game. So, in addition to that, a couple other things I like. They threw a lot of wide receiver screens when Hackett and Rodgers were paired up. And once again, it was Adams who dominated most of those. He got 62% of the screen passes that the Packers threw over those 3 years. So they really fed Adams the ball, gave him chances to make plays. And I think that'll benefit Wilson as well because we know how elusive he was last year. And just giving him chances to make plays is something that can be beneficial, especially in the red zone. And then finally, the crossing routes, I think, is a good fit for some of the talent the Jets have. And I think specifically the tight ends will benefit from
Yes.
that. Conklin, Uzama, both those guys, I think you look at their film prior to coming to the Jets, Conklin with the Vikings and Uzama with the Bengals. It was a big part of why those guys had breakout years in 21 that got them signed by the Jets. Conklin in 2021 caught 10 of 11 crossers for 128 yards and a touchdown. Uzama was 7 of 7 for 82 yards and a touchdown. But the Jets, they really did not get that usage. They combined for only 8 catches and 53 yards with 1 touchdown on crossing routes. So they were underutilized there. Rodgers loved throwing crossing routes to tight ends. Listen to these numbers that Rodgers had on crossing routes to tight ends with Hackett over those 3 years. 59 of 72. That's 82% for 660 yards, 7 touchdowns, no picks. So I think those two guys are going to get unlocked with those crossing routes. Lazard had a great connection with Rodgers on those crossing routes. He had 20 of 29 for 230 yards, 4 touchdowns. So there's a lot of ways that Rodgers fits with these weapons when you look specifically at the type of throws he likes to make, and then the specific things that these weapons are good at. I really think it's a match in a lot of ways. So, and it goes without saying how good Rodgers is. I don't think you need to explain that to anyone who's watched football in any capacity over the last 15 years. But for me, I think the two main things I'm most excited about from a football perspective are number one, I think, are the deep shots, which you talked about. It's just an element the Jets haven't had. But number two, look at these interception numbers this man puts up. I mean, this guy's seasons where he throws 4 picks, 5, 4, 2, 6, 7, 8. Obviously, last year he had 12, which was a little
Broken
bit of an
thumb.
outlier. And broken thumb for the whole season. Multiple rookie receivers. Some of them are tipped balls. But generally, you're getting single-digit interceptions from Rodgers, and we've seen single games, where Jets quarterbacks throw more than Rodgers throws in a whole season. So I cannot wait to see 5-game streaks with no interceptions, 8-game streaks, and just being able to play football games and not have to look back at the end and think, how would things have gone if we didn't turn the ball over? If he didn't have those 2 interceptions, those 3 interceptions, we're not going to have those games anymore, or at least much less frequently. So those are the 2 things I'm most excited about is uh, just that explosive element on those vertical shots down the sideline, and also just the ability to throw very, very few interceptions and not lose the game for your team.
Yeah, even if you want to say, look, he's 39 and last year wasn't as good, maybe he's declining. Even Aaron Rodgers last year would have taken the Jets well into the playoffs. I think there are a few things that I'm excited about, obviously. Seeing him with these weapons, having a veteran quarterback. We saw this year how much of the quarterback position is mental. Zach Wilson is a guy who has physically all the talent in the world, but mentally had a lot of struggles, and having a veteran quarterback back there, even if his arm isn't what it used to be, which I actually don't agree with. I think I watched his 22 film, and man, just the accuracy he puts on some of these throws, even with a broken thumb, is better than any Jets quarterback I've ever seen. He just throws such a pretty ball. And just, having the veteran quarterback who can, at the line of scrimmage, set protections. That's a huge thing that the Jets have really struggled with, having young quarterbacks. You're not going to have as many wide open free rushers coming right up the A gap that a quarterback doesn't spot. Not going to be confused by some of the disguised looks that New England and Miami will throw in your division. Being able to throw the more difficult passes like the back shoulder fades that, he threw to Alan Lazard actually against the Jets on Brandon Eccles. I mean, that's a throw he's really good at. There's a lot of things that having a crafty veteran like Aaron Rodgers is going to bring you that you just don't think about on the surface level. But as excited as I am to see him with these weapons, I think the number one thing I'm most excited I am to see with Aaron Rodgers is how he works with Breece Hall. Yes, the receivers is going to be great, but having Breece Hall, who we'll see how he is coming off the ACL. Typically, running backs, can take some time to get going after the ACL surgery, but he says he's ahead of schedule. I expect him to still be a damn good running back. If the Jets have a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who's going to force defenses to play too high looks with their safeties, go light in the box, Breece Hall is going to have a field day. And not just running the football. Breece Hall is a tremendous receiving back. And you mentioned Rodgers going to the checkdowns, throwing to running backs. We saw what he did with Aaron Jones. Watching Rodgers throw those wheel routes to Breece Hall, watching, them flex Breece Hall out wide and him throw it to him. I think the dynamic between Rodgers and Breece Hall is as exciting to me as it is with Garrett Wilson or Lazard or Elijah Moore, just because of the versatility it's going to give the Jets offense. If you want to go play the box and stop Breece Hall and stop this ground and pound attack, which I think will be the initial identity of the Jets, I think they're going to try to impose themselves on the ground early in games and early on downs, then you're going to leave yourself one-on-one with Garrett Wilson or one-on-one with Elijah Moore or these tight ends. And Aaron Rodgers is going to beat you deep. And if you want to play coverage, then the Jets have a running back in Breece Hall who we saw the talent that he brought last year, and he's going to exploit that. So I'm really excited to see that. And then obviously on top of that, putting Aaron Rodgers in a situation, this is really the dream situation for Aaron Rodgers. Yes, having weapons. First of all, yes, he had Devontae Adams, but the Packers have not really surrounded Aaron Rodgers with a lot of weapons. How many times have they, not just picking Jordan Love, but picking defensive players in the draft, ignoring the receiver position for Aaron Rodgers. Yes, he has great young talent at the receiver position. He also has those two tight ends that you mentioned that were underutilized by Zach Wilson, but are two talented receivers that I think Rodgers will find a way to utilize, especially in the red zone. Having a running game, we'll see about the offensive line. We'll talk about it in a second. But then on top of that, having a great defense. I mean, you mentioned a guy who doesn't turn the ball over as much. Even if Aaron Rodgers is just managing the game, the baseline, the worst version of Aaron Rodgers you're going to get, him managing the game, being Jimmy Garoppolo, the Jets are still going to win plenty of games. And I'll give credit to, I think it was at Buffalo Jet Fan. He put this tweet out and had me very excited. I'll retweet it right now. He said Aaron Rodgers is 80-9 when his defense has allowed fewer than 20 points in his career. And the 2022 Jets allowed 18.6 points per game. So just the combination of the running game, the weapons that he has, an elite veteran quarterback, and a damn good defense who, look, they were top 4 last year, maybe with some regression that they'll slide back a bit, but still a top 10 defense. You're looking at a team that is, destined to go to the playoffs, and not only that, make a Super Bowl run. And that's not just, I know I'm the homer on this podcast. I know I have the reputation as being the optimist. I even said last week, and it raised some eyebrows, but Michael, you let me know what you think. I said if this goes through, and obviously we have to see how the Jets fill out the rest of the roster. They still have some holes in the offensive line and defensive tackle. They've got some money to spend and some draft picks to fill those holes. But if they fill out this roster the way that I think Joe Douglas will, I don't know if there's a more talented team in the NFL outside of maybe San Francisco. San Francisco is probably the only team I put above them. But look around the league. And that's not to say that the Jets are a shoe-in to win it all. Obviously, if you have a quarterback like Mahomes or Allen or Burrow, any of those guys can beat you on any given day. But you look at the defense the Jets have, the weapons they have, the running game they have, and you add Aaron Rodgers to that, those other guys don't have that combination going for them. So, we've been doing this podcast for a few years, Michael, and I can't imagine what it'll be like to be doing a podcast talking about playoff games. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but man, I'm legitimately excited and optimistic. And this feels like the first time the Jets are destined to be Super Bowl contenders since I was like 10 years old. So this is an exciting time. I guess just how do you feel about before we move on to some other stuff? There's one more topic I want to talk about with Rodgers, but you touched on the weapons and how he fits with Garrett Wilson, but how do you feel he fits with Breece Hall? That's what really gets me excited, that having the dynamic between the running game and Rodgers and some of the things that they can do throwing the ball to Breece.
Well, yeah, I think that's something to be really excited about because, like I was talking about earlier, the he loves throwing into the flat. Rodgers does, as you know, as much as his highlight reel is exciting and there are plenty of deep shots on it, you know, scrambling throws on the move, all that cool stuff. It's over those 3 years with Hackett, it was just really efficient checkdowns and safe throws that were really his bread and butter that allowed him to throw 2 interceptions a year and complete 70% of his passes. It's because he was picking his spots effectively. He would take the shots when the shots were available in a high percentage way, but he wouldn't force them. And he would rely on those checkdowns to keep the chains moving, keep himself in medium to short distance, second and third downs, and just keep himself playing efficient football. So, uh, according to Next Gen Stats, 19% of his pass attempts were flat routes over those 3 seasons with Hackett. That was his highest of any route, and it was over 5% above the league average, which was his highest of any route type as well. So, more than any other route type, he targeted flats more than any other quarterback. So he loves those throws. Most of them go to running backs, and like Jamal Williams had a four receiving touchdown season with Rodgers. Aaron Jones had a 4 receiving touchdown season. So I think Brees Hall is absolutely capable of being that type of player with Aaron Rodgers, a guy who catches a lot of passes and scores quite a few touchdowns as well. So I'm very excited to see that part of Rodgers' game.
And his ability to with the play action fake. I think
Yeah.
that's another thing too. He's a great play action quarterback, ability to play with the back to the defense. We were talking about it this week. I think, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, but the first Jets touchdown I really remember, the season that I really got into the Jets, was that Favre season. Obviously, I was raised a Jets fan, but you're a kid, and I was 4 years old when Doug Bryan missed the 2 field goals, and I said, "Uh-oh." I don't remember that, but that's my dad's story. But I remember being 8. I remember when the Jets traded for Favre, and I remember watching that first game he had in Miami, and that first touchdown he threw, the first Jets touchdown I can ever remember. That play fake he makes, go back and watch. That might be the best play fake I've ever seen. I remember just watching that over and over again as a kid. That's the level of veteran craftsmanship that the Jets are going to get that they haven't had since Favre. And I'm just so excited to see, what Rodgers is going to bring in the play action game. And like you said, I mean, not just, with the flat routes, obviously he's a guy who's going to take what the defense gives him, but it's going to open up the deep shots. He's going to get those play fakes, and it's not going to be Jericho Cotchery this time. It's going to be Garrett Wilson on the end of those 60-yard bombs. I'm over the moon excited about this. I think when we were talking about, Derek Carr versus Aaron Rodgers, Carr felt a little safer. There's a little less timeliness in terms of you got 1 year, you really got to push for it. Carr would have given you maybe 4 or 5 years of good, solid top 10 to 15 quarterback play, and maybe that would have gotten the Jets some playoff wins. But if you're going to go into Kansas City, you're going to be the underdog against Patrick Mahomes and those Chiefs. With Aaron Rodgers, the Jets have a chance, and again, people are going to roll their eyes. I know I'm the homer. The Jets have a chance to be the 1 seed in the AFC this year. I'm sorry. With this team on paper, look, a lot of stuff has to happen. They have to get through training camp. They have to stay healthy. I know. I'm just saying, look at this roster compared to every other Jets roster since 2010. It's night and day. The Jets are back. The Jets are back in Super Bowl contention. It's been so freaking long, and I just think we have to soak that in. Uh, Here's one other part of
I mean, they have the sixth best Super Bowl odds, so it's not like we're
yeah,
being homers by saying that.
I know, but I read the YouTube comments, Michael. Um, there's one other aspect of this trade that is great that other people will definitely roll their eyes about, but it is true, and I do think it is part of the reason the Jets are doing this. It's not the only reason, but it's Zach Wilson. It's not Zach Wilson most likely is a lost cause. Statistically speaking, it would be improbable for him to turn his career around. However, if you watch Zach Wilson and you see the flashes and you see physically how talented he is and you realize how much his mistakes are mental and honestly confidence. I mean, talking about having the yips, it's not even, there's the mental side of things in terms of like, reading the defense and setting protections and stuff like that he has to improve on. But it's also just the mental toughness side of things, in terms of, responding to interceptions and boos and not forgetting how to throw a swing pass to Braxton Berrios. He had a mental issue last year. And maybe that's something that sticks with him for the rest of his career. Plenty of quarterbacks have been sunk by the mental scars that develop early in their career. But you go back and watch Michael. I think you were watching the the preseason game he had against the Packers, which like preseason football, whatever. But you watch that and you're like, damn, this guy's going to be so good. And then obviously we see how it's gone. Getting Zach Wilson the chance to take a breath, to get out of the spotlight, to sit behind his idol, to see how Aaron Rodgers prepares, to see, to ask Aaron Rodgers every day for advice and in terms of, well, what did you see here? What were you doing here? What were you thinking here? That's going to be incredibly beneficial for Zach Wilson's career. And, maybe if there's if Rodgers stays 2 years, that's right when Zach Wilson's contract ends. So who knows? But let's say Rodgers stays 2 years. It's possible he only stays 1 year, and then Zach has a chance a year from now to compete for the starting job, assuming he, does okay in preseason and throughout the year. But if he stays 2 years, that's still 2 years in Nathaniel Hackett's system where the Jets are watching him, where he's learning under Rodgers. And even if he doesn't play in that entire time, the Jets could still re-sign him at a cheaper price, bring in another veteran. I know we're getting 2 years from now. I'm just saying, and give him a chance to compete. I think Zach Wilson will have one more crack at things here in New York. That's how I feel. And it's possible he'll get some playing time this year. You have a 39-year-old quarterback. The offensive line isn't perfect right now. It's possible injuries can happen. I think he'll get one more chance to prove himself. And I think this is the only way that he could save his career in New York is with this move. It's not the only reason you'd make the move. I'm not counting on it, but I'm not ready to burn my Zach Wilson jersey. So what do you think about the potential impact on Zach Wilson's career? Do you think it's possible for him to be saved?
I don't know. To be completely honest with you, my team just got Aaron Rodgers.
All
I'm not
right.
thinking about Zach Wilson.
I
I'm
know.
not thinking about him at all.
Well, it's March and we got to talk about that. You don't want to, I mean, you don't think that I know there's a vast majority of Jets fans are sick of Zach Wilson, but there's a small segment of us who want to see it work out for him, who see the talent that he has and have seen, look at a guy like Geno Smith, who was never as bad as Zach Wilson was, but struggled here, bounced around the league. It's a decade later. He's a complete anomaly, but you can just see what happens when a young, talented quarterback gets the time to sit on the bench and develop and become a veteran.
Can we just win the Super Bowl with Rodgers?
Well,
not talk about
that's
this guy.
the dream. That's the dream. You win the Super Bowl. You hand it off to Zach, and maybe Zach can turn it around. You don't have any hope for Zach? You've given up on him?
I've given up, yes.
All right. Well, you're just a hater. But yeah, I think statistically speaking, it's improbable. But still, if I'm going to be the optimist in this podcast, I gotta bring up everything. All right. Let's talk about some of the other free agency stuff. I'm sure more Rodgers stuff will pop up. Obviously, we'll be talking about him all offseason.
Can I make 2 more Rodgers points quickly?
Keep going.
I guess we haven't talked about it since he made the announcement, so there's some stuff to discuss. 2 quick points in terms of on the field stuff. Well, actually, one is on the field. One is more of an overarching thing, but one more on the field thing that I'm excited about is, and this is something that if you listen to our Derek Carr podcast, Marcus told us this about Derek Carr bringing this to the table. But the effect on the offensive line, I think, is something I'm excited to see because quarterback has a huge effect on offensive line play. Obviously, the offensive line is tasked with protecting the quarterback, but the quarterback can make the offensive line's job easier. They can make them look better by, doing a good job of setting protections, like you said, avoiding sacks, getting the ball out on time, doing all these things. And it's something that Rodgers has done really well because you look at the Packers' numbers last season in terms of offensive line related stuff, and Rodgers got sacked at a pretty low rate. Their offensive line ranks high in different like pressure stats and stuff like that, but they had a ton of offensive line injuries. And if you look at like what Packers fans and film people are saying about that O-line, they don't have glowing reviews about how they looked with the eye test and all that, but the production of the offensive line looks good because the quarterback is making it look good because he's doing things to protect himself. So I think that's something that he'll bring to the table. And regardless of if the Jets offensive line can, stay healthy and get strong and all that, I think it'll still naturally improve significantly off of where it was just because Rodgers does all these things to where he's going to minimize those communication breakdowns because they'll make sure everyone's set and knows who they're supposed to pick up and all those things. And then post snap, he'll get the ball out early and not take those sacks that Zach Wilson would have taken. And he'll be able to do all these things to make it look like he's being more well protected than he may actually be based on what's truly happening. But obviously, you still want a great offensive line, so he doesn't have all that stress. So he can stand back there for 4 seconds if he needs to. And the offensive line is, regardless of what the quarterback's doing, performing consistently. So you still want the good offensive line, despite who the quarterback is. It's not like he can cancel out everything
Right.
with a bad offensive line, but he can do a lot of things to help them perform above their true talent level.
Yeah, it's why Tom Brady is very rarely hurt. It's the
Right.
pre-snap adjustments, setting the protections, being a fast processor and able to get the ball out quickly. And then it's just the little nuanced, the subtle nuanced pocket movement. You're not going to
Right.
see Aaron Rodgers running 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage with his back to the defense. He just knows how to slide up into the pressure, slide out of the pressure. He knows when to bail out of the pocket.
Right.
That's what you're getting with a veteran quarterback like Rodgers. And maybe he's not the athlete he used to be, but as you've seen with 40-year-old Brady, if you're able to manipulate the pocket just in subtle ways, you'll be fine.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah,
what he does.
that's a fantastic point because there's a lot of subtlety to that. You don't always have to be the most amazing athlete to dodge
Burrow's great
sacks.
at this.
Yeah, Burrow as well is a young example of this kind of quarterback, and there aren't a ton of like quarterbacks of the style anymore, really. But like, you don't have to be the most amazing athlete to dodge all these sacks because sometimes it's just one step to the left or one step up or one step to the right. Sometimes you just duck your upper body and let the guy go over top of you and keep standing there. There's this subtlety to it that the greats have. And you see it in Brady because like Brady's been the least athletic quarterback since he was drafted, but he always gets sacked at a very low rate and makes his offensive line look good because even if he is pressured, he knows how to mitigate that pressure to avoid it and just keep going on with the play. So that's the type of thing that Rodgers still brings to the table. Obviously, he earlier in his career was one of the more athletic quarterbacks, and it's dwindled a little bit in recent years for sure. That's going to happen, but even despite that, he still just has that same thing that Brady has, Burrow, like you mentioned, to where he could dodge that pressure, and it's going to be valuable on a team that might have some offensive line struggles, but regardless of how good or bad it is, you always like to have that, and it makes your offensive line look better. It inspires their confidence to where they don't feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. So there's a lot of ways he helps the offensive line. And the other thing, last thing on Rodgers before we move on, is I kind of wanted to compare how we feel right now to how we would have felt if they signed Carr, because I feel like I'm a lot more excited than I would have been with Carr in the sense where I'm like super hyped up. Like this is going to be a really fun Jets season, like the most anticipated at least since I've been watching. And like Jets are sixth in Super Bowl odds. They're dominating national conversations. A lot of people hate the Jets now, which is great. So like, there's
They're
all this.
definitely going to be on Hard Knocks. Just prepare
Yeah,
yourself.
definitely gonna be in Hard Knocks. They're like the biggest heels in the league now, so it's a lot of fun. And I'm thinking with Carr, like you said, it was the safer option. I think part of the benefit of that is not going through the type of stuff we're going through right now. I think that was a big part of it. But yeah,
We're
this
ready
is
for it.
definitely the more
Well,
exciting option.
the thing is, though, is the Jets always are, not that they're, I don't want to say they're always the center of attention, but they always seem to draw the attention of the national media. And if they had Carr, they would have been made fun of for Carr's quote at the press conference he had with the Saints, where he's like, "Well, I can't promise wins, but I can promise effort." People would have
Yeah,
just
I
dunked
know
on
when I
that.
saw that, I'd be like, when as soon as I saw it, it's like, why did we want him again? But we can't be hindsight here. We knew what the pros and cons were of these two guys. We knew Carr
Yeah,
was safer, higher floor, more. He can give you more
I like
years.
Carr.
You can trust the durability, and you could have a high floor, and you hope that you can get that ceiling out of him with a better supporting cast than he's ever had. So we'll see in the long run which path was better. If Rodgers plays one year here and he struggles with injuries or his play continues declining as he showed some subtle signs of last year. We keep dealing with drama and the cap gets killed and all these things which are risks that are still very much alive. Then maybe we will wish we had Carr, but at the same time there is that Super Bowl upside that I think Carr was not out of the question. I think Carr definitely could have won a Super Bowl with the Jets, but it's certainly harder to picture,
Right.
not quite as likely
Going
as with
through
Rodgers.
Yeah, going through Josh Allen and Mahomes and Burrow and
Right.
Lawrence. I mean, you just look at this gauntlet of AFC quarterbacks with Rodgers and the rest of this team. There's a lot of confidence. I have a lot of confidence that the Jets can do that. One more thing. I know we keep saying one more thing, Rodgers, but I want to get your thoughts on this because obviously we saw this not really work out in Denver with Russell Wilson, who, by the way, has never been the quarterback that Aaron Rodgers was. You know, Aaron Rodgers back-to-back MVP. Has he won 3 MVPs in his career? Four.
4.
Four MVPs in his career, two in the last 3 years. So different level of quarterback, but obviously you saw the reports of Nathaniel Hackett, kind of placating Russell Wilson, trying to build the offense that Russell Wilson wanted. Russell Wilson wanted these types of plays, and he gave Russell Wilson a lot of control in the offense that he was going to run. Obviously, that blew up. And so I think it is kind of hard to grade Hackett in Denver because of how much of this is Russell Wilson's offense. If you read the reports, it sounds like a lot of what they're running is stuff that Russ wanted to run and it just wasn't working and he wasn't playing well. And Denver also had a very high percentage of open receivers. So it wasn't like, Russell Wilson was getting no help out there. But I think part of what is attractive about the Jets to Aaron Rodgers, in addition to everything we've said and the fact that Nathaniel Hackett is there, is I think for the first time in his career, he's going to have a lot of say and a lot of control in the offense. Not to say that he didn't with LaFleur, but there were clearly a few times over the last few years with LaFleur where there was a disagreement, between the two of them. LaFleur is a bright guy, Rodgers is a bright guy, and they seem to be on the same page most of the time, but there are a few times where you'd see him get animated in the sideline or, you could just tell there was some sort of disagreement. And I think in New York, what's attractive to a guy like Rodgers, who is very smart and thinks he's very smart, is the ability to kind of mold his own offense and have a lot of say in what the Jets are going to do offensively. How much do you think the Jets will give him? I mean, are they just going to give him free reign? Aaron Rodgers, you're basically half quarterback, half offensive coordinator. Is that something that you think is going to work out? I mean, he is, you can make the argument he's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Unlike Nathaniel Hackett, he's actually out there on the field and has done it. Is this a good thing? Are you giving too much power to a player? I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what they're going to do, but I'd imagine, considering how close Hackett and Rodgers are that Rodgers is going to have a substantial say in what this offense looks like. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I feel like he will have a lot to say, and I don't even think that's the worst thing because you just look at Brady when he went to Tampa Bay. It almost feels like he was running the whole show there, and it worked. It led to good results, and I think you can put Rodgers on in the conversation with Brady. I mean, different levels of team success throughout their careers, but I think you look at them as players, and I think you can put them head to head in that way. So I really think that level of control would be good for Rodgers because at the same time you don't want to concede so much power to a player, regardless of who he might be. This is Aaron Rodgers, and I think letting him have control, especially there's a lot of young players in this offense, I think that could really help all these guys get on the same page and kind of establish a common goal and just mission with what they're trying to accomplish in each game on each play. So I think it would be good to give Rodgers some of that power to really be in control here, which, it would be nice to get him in the building as early as possible to start, working towards that. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, if you listen to that McAfee interview, he said the one thing he demands is transparency, and obviously he feels like maybe he didn't fully get that in Green Bay. I can't necessarily speak for Joe Douglas, although hearing him speak, he does seem like a pretty straightforward, direct guy. Although, I know his first year there were some ups and downs. How much of that was Gase, who knows? But Robert Saleh pretty clearly is a guy his players love because he's straightforward. He's a player's coach, but not necessarily a coddler. He's just direct with his guys. He treats them like human beings. You're not getting, there are benefits to the Bill Belichick way of thinking or Josh McDaniels way of thinking. The Jets certainly reaped those benefits with Bill Parcells in the late 90s, but I think Rodgers fits into this type of culture extremely well. And also the young locker room, a vibrant locker room who's excited to have him. I feel like this is really all the stars are really aligning for Rodgers to have a great year. And I'll be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if he plays beyond this year. I know he said it was 90% sure he was going to retire, but I think if he goes into this year and has a fun year where he enjoys playing football again, he has fun in New York, the Jets win some games, I could see him coming back for another year and maybe another year after that. I mean, quarterbacks and players in the NFL are playing longer than ever. They're prioritizing their body more than ever. So, it's possible this isn't just a 1 year stopgap. I think the Jets have to plan for it to be that, but I think there's also the thinking that, he might be here in 2024 and that's probably it, but maybe 2025 as well. I think this is just really a really great situation for him. The and I'll ask you this last thing, the fifth last thing. Is there anything that scares you with Rodgers? I mean, we're just raving about him and talking about how excited we are, but obviously with everything, and we try to be measured on this podcast and present both sides of things. Are there any negatives you can come up with? I mean, the only one that I can think of is kind of what we're already seeing is just the scrutiny, the level of scrutiny that Aaron Rodgers is going to get. It's going to be contentious with the New York media. There's going to be the headlines. And let's just be honest, if things aren't going well, the Boo Birds will come out in New York and, who knows how that would go. But outside of that, I don't know if there's many concerns for me. Are there any negatives that you can think of with this whole Rodgers situation?
I think, you just look at his production last year and you wonder, is that potentially a sign of decline? But as usual, whenever you see things with the numbers, you have to look at the film and kind of verify it. And from what I've watched from Rodgers last season, and I haven't watched every play of every single game yet, but I've looked through a few games.
Emphasis on yet.
Yet.
We're going to get through his entire career.
We're going to get there. Every single play, even 2005, his first
preseason
drive he ever played, his preseason games.
With the Bills.
No, not going back that far. But yeah, I have watched a decent amount of this 2022, and I think physically all the talent is still there. I mean, there are still some crazy throws on there. And as you mentioned, a lot of that with the thumb injury. You just look at that Dolphins game, which I know a lot of Jets fans watched because we were cheering for the Packers in that game.
That was our playoff game.
That was our playoff game, and it was the last fun moment of the season as a Jets fan, and it was a little preview of what it's like to root for Aaron Rodgers, which was a lot more fun than anything I've experienced the past few years. So, but yeah, look at that game and the play he had rolling out to his left and flicking this perfect vertical ball to Mercedes Lewis, and he also had a great go route to Alan Lazard in that game. I mean, the arm talent, I think, was still there in the season. I don't see any decline. But obviously, look at the numbers. He had a lot more interceptions than he usually has. Touchdowns were down, completion percentage down. So you're like, why'd that happen? But I really think a lot of that was just on the talent around him. Devontae Adams left. Lazard was miscast as their number one receiver for much of the season. Christian Watson really struggled for the first half of the year before he started coming on. Romeo Doubs had a tough rookie season. Romeo Doubs. How do you pronounce that? Dobbs or Doubs?
I think it's Dobbs. I'm pretty sure it's Dobbs.
Dobbs. We struggle with pronunciation on this podcast.
Other podcasts would just brush right over it, and just if they get it wrong, they get it wrong. But we
do acknowledge it. We care about our grammar and our spelling and all that stuff here. So yeah, we'll just call him Romeo. Romeo was struggling for as in his rookie season. A lot of young guys around Rodgers, but the drop numbers, he had one of the. Or I'm gonna check it right now just to verify it because again, this podcast we care about the details. He had one of the highest drop rates in the league of any quarterback. And you see that on film. Like, there were some really bad drops, a lot of great deep balls. And it started with his first pass of the season, a very easy 70-yard touchdown right in the bucket to Watson, right through the hands.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a bunch of those throughout the season. Romeo had a few of them. Aaron Jones had one of them. So even Lazard had some key drops. But again, I think he was kind of miscast last season. So yeah, the drops I think killed his production a lot, but purely looking at the arm talent and the physical tools, which is what I think you fear the most will decline in an older quarterback. I still saw all of that last season. I didn't see any decline. Like maybe the velocity's off a little bit. I think movement skills you expect, he doesn't rush with the ball as often. He doesn't tuck and run it, but he could still evade pressure really well with some of the subtlety we talked about. And then pure arm talent, velocity, and accuracy, I still saw it. So I don't have any fears yet that he's declining. But we will see because he's turning 40 and you could hit that wall at any point. Just look at Peyton Manning, who went from, setting records with the Broncos to all of a sudden he couldn't throw in that last season. But he did still win the Super Bowl. So if that's how it goes down, I wouldn't mind. But regardless, I didn't see too much decline from him physically last season. So let's see what happens. Hopefully he doesn't hit that Peyton Manning wall. That's what I would be afraid of. But there weren't any
No.
indications of that last year.
Well, and then you can look at, I think the most relevant example for the move the Jets are making is Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. And Tom Brady had that down year in 2019, and people kind of thought it was maybe wrapping up for Brady. And then he gets the right situation in Tampa. They surround him with weapons, and he goes and has a great season. They win the Super Bowl. And Tampa Bay, historically, not a very successful franchise, much like the Jets. You bring in that veteran quarterback. He brings some of his buddies. You attract some big free agents. You have a young, talented roster with a good defense, and you can win it all. I think Russell Wilson last year really blew up for the Broncos, but outside of that, there's a pretty good track record of quarterbacks on the level of Aaron Rodgers, which I don't think Russell is, but still a good quarterback, um, going to a second team and having success. I mean, even Joe Montana made the playoffs. Even Brett Favre. I know people reference, well, how did that work out? It's like 8-3. They were Super Bowl favorites. They beat the 10-0 Titans until he tore his bicep. Manning won a Super Bowl with the Broncos. So I feel like a quarterback on the level of Aaron Rodgers on this team can only mean good things. We'll just have to see how they fill the team out around him, and then all the variables in terms of injuries and the way the ball bounces and whatnot. But I'm very, very, very excited for this Jet season, probably more so than any season since I was a kid. Maybe 2015. I was pretty pumped. No, but then Geno got knocked out in the locker room, and that kind of took some win. I mean, this really is the most excited I think any Jets fan has been probably since 2010 or 2011. It's just
Also, I
exciting.
got that drop rate as promised.
Yeah, for
According
Romeo.
to Pro Football Reference, for Rodgers, 7.8%, second highest of
Oh, for
any
Rodgers.
quarterback. So,
Wow.
yeah, I think that is
Who
probably the main reason his numbers went down.
do you have first? Who's first? Curious.
It was actually Lamar Jackson, 8.4%.
Can you explain briefly, because I know most Jets fans understand the Jets, because I've seen some Jets fans and I would imagine most listening to this understand why the Jets aren't going to go for Lamar, why they couldn't pivot to him. But I've seen some, so I figure we should mention it. I've brought up, well, if the Packers want a first round pick, the Jets could just pivot and try to go after Lamar. You want it? You want to take that one, or should I?
I mean, I think it's pretty simple. Like, it's hard to use Lamar as a threat when you don't even have control over signing him because the Ravens can just match it. So it feels like a pretty obvious thing to realize, but some people don't.
That's the main thing, and also the guaranteed money that Lamar wants, the Jets don't necessarily
Right.
have. Part of what's attractive with Rodgers is that his cap hit, when traded for, would only be $15 million this year, which the Jets can fit. Lamar wants a lot of guaranteed money, and he'd probably want a lot of guaranteed money this year. We're talking, $45 million or something, or closer to $50 million. And then, yeah, like you said, it sounds like the Ravens are going to match whatever he's offered. Rodgers is the clear scheme fit. Obviously, he's already declared he wants to play here. It's just that's not happening. So I feel like most Jets fans know that, but I just, throw water on that one. All right. That's a lot of Rodgers talk. We're going to have countless hours of Rodgers talk this summer. I'm very excited for it, and spring. Let's talk about some of the other free agency news and headlines that have happened. Thomas Morstead, bringing him back in. What did you think about that? It's a big move. It's competition for Braden Mann, but more likely Braden Mann's replacement. He was great in 2021 when Mann was hurt. Pretty pumped to bring Morstead back. And I like that the Jets have a pair of veteran special teamers in Zerline and Morstead.
It's a great move. I liked it when I saw it. It's the only move other than Rodgers that they've made where I was like, yes, let's go. Like kind of like an audible reaction.
You didn't get that way for Lazard or Chuck Clark? Well, Clark got ruined because of Adam Schefter's stupid tweet, but
well, yeah, it
Schefter
did.
trade.
I wouldn't have
I
had
got
an
pretty
audible
mad for
reaction.
Clark.
I like the move, but like there are certain aspects you need for it to be like an audible reaction. And when I saw Morstead like post a picture of himself in a Jets jersey, I know he's still a top punter.
He's gonna have to
He had a
change
good
it though.
season.
It's not wearing DJ Reed's
Yeah.
number.
That's true, but he had a good season with us a couple of years ago, so I was like, let's go. And like I wanted them to sign a punter. That's one of my top things on the wish list. So I did get an audible reaction. I like the move.
Well, hopefully we don't have to see him too much this season.
True.
Otherwise, the only two moves the Jets made were on the offensive line. A couple of important signings because they lost Dan Feeney to Miami. They lost Nate Herbig to Pittsburgh. So they signed Commanders offensive lineman Wes Schweitzer, guard and center. And then they also brought in former Raven. We know Joe Douglas loves his former Ravens, Tristan Colon. So you dug into both those guys a little bit. We're going to get into the rest of the O-line plan, and there's a few other things, but let's just talk about these two guys real quick. You watched both of them briefly. I've watched a few of them. Cologne is again, Cologne. It's not no chance it's Colon. It's got to be Cologne, right? It's got to be like
It's
Willie.
Cologne.
Okay,
It's
thank you. Um,
I can't 100% confirm that, but I just can't imagine it's. I've never heard it pronounced that way. So.
we're gonna go with Colon or Cologne. Jesus. Um, it seems like out of the two of them, Cologne. Now I'm really thinking about Cologne. Uh, is very intriguing. I mean, from the clips that you sent me and some of the brief, I'll be honest, you watched a lot more than I did on this week. Some of the brief clips that I watched of his gameplay. Neither of them are guys you should pencil in as starters right now, but they do give the Jets, uh, that security entering the draft in the interior of the offensive line. Assuming they might make some more other moves in the offensive line heading into the draft, but seems like upgrades over at least an upgrade over Feeney. We'll see about Herbig. But what did you think about those two guys and what they bring and how they fit into this offense?
Yeah, I think they're solid depth signings. I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves and consider either to be starting candidates. But Schweitzer, I mean, I guess he's a good Herbig replacement, and he does have center experience as well. But it seems like he's played better at guard than center, and he's a lot more guard experience than center. It was really this past season the first time he played it for multiple games, extended time in a row. So more so a backup guard, I think he is. And I think he's as advertised for his contract. Just probably a higher level backup guard. So I think he can kind of replace what Herbig brought last year. And then Cologne is interesting because he was the guy they signed, and I think what percentage of Jets fans do you think knew him immediately? Less than 1%? Because
Yeah,
I didn't, and I
I
feel
was
like
in that group. Yep.
I have a pretty good
I just
knowledge of
I
players.
made my entire assumption on Cologne just by reading Ravens fans' reactions to losing him, and then I was like, all right, this guy seems pretty good there because they're pretty upset about losing him, and then we dug into the film, but it seems like Ravens fans were not
Right.
happy to lose him.
Yeah. So I was interested to watch him because I was like, this is a pretty random player who has really not played a lot of games in the league. So I'm like, what did they see in him? And I looked at some of his stats first, and he had some good pass protection stats. He hasn't played a lot in the league, only 4 starts in 3 years. Most of those at center. He has started at guard once. Yeah, so yeah, most of his games at center, he's put up some good pass blocking stats. I'm like, is there something here with this guy? And then I dig into some of the games he started at center, and one of those was against the Rams uh, in 2021. So a good D line with Aaron Donald, and like he was really impressive. Like I started watching the game and I'm like, all right, we're racking up plays here. He's not making mistakes. And I'm like, he just keeps going and going with no mistakes. And I'm like, I got to put out some clips of this guy. So I did put out a little reel of some of the highlights I saw from him. So I'm not gonna get too far ahead of myself or anything, but
Now,
I've
what was his name? Oh god, what was it?
Josh
Josh
Andrews.
Andrews.
Yeah, yeah. A few years ago, we did the same exact thing. Josh Andrews was an unknown offensive lineman who had like 1 start at center. It was against the Steelers. He was on the Colts, and we were like, "This guy's kind of
He had a
good."
great game.
And we got all excited about him. And then he was absolutely terrible with the Jets. So that could happen here. It's definitely on the table. But
He's got
I mean,
T-Rex
Cologne is
arms.
T-Rex arms. That's a point you got to bring up here. That's probably a big reason why he is so low valued because his arms are very short. Like AVT gets criticized for having short arms. I think he's a little over 32 inches. Cologne is at 30.5 inches. It's the first percentile for O line. And
Damn.
also his bench press at the combine, 11 reps. It's the third fewest ever
That's
at the
surprising because you'd
combine.
think with the shorter arms he would have had
Right,
a
that's what I was
higher
thinking. Like
bench.
that should help him bench more. So I don't know if he's corrected those strength issues, but so yeah, there are significant physical limitations that probably have a lot to do with this. But he has good production in a small sample, and I watched a little bit of film, and I'm not the biggest O line guru in the world or anything, but I do watch plenty of film, so I feel like I have a good perspective on what average consistency looks like. And I would say, was more consistent than I expected. So I'll be keeping an eye on him as a potential diamond in the rough.
Well, depth on the offensive line is always a good thing. We'll see how these guys perform. But I like the two moves they made. Otherwise, they haven't done anything. what are your thoughts on the slow free agent period for the Jets? Obviously, they've been caught up in the Rodgers saga. They were in on Jake Brendel, offered him more money than San Francisco did, and then he chose to go. They even had apparently Rodgers getting a phone call with him, so they really wanted Brendel, but he chose to go back to San Francisco. It was reported they were in on Orlando Brown and offered him some money, which would have been interesting because he is a very good tackle. Maybe not the best scheme fit, but still a damn good tackle. But he did also want to play left tackle. Becton wants to play left tackle. They already have Dwayne Brown, who's a left tackle. So that would have been interesting. But obviously, he went to Cincinnati. So outside of that, we haven't. I mean, Jamal Williams, we didn't really know if they were in on him, but he went to the Saints. It was reported that they were maybe in on him. Um, there's still a few guys are in. We'll talk about them in a second. I guess the other one that actually just broke while we were doing this podcast, and I'm going to break some bad news to you, Michael, unless you already saw the tweet I sent you. But
Yeah, I saw it.
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson going with the Lions, which, all right, fine. They didn't go, they didn't want to pay a safety. Fine. I get it. They have holes. They don't want to invest, but up to 1 year, $6.5 million guaranteed to up to 8 million. I mean, it's a damn good football player and a good scheme fit who gets a lot of takeaways. I mean, I guess the NFL didn't see the same value because maybe he's a little undersized and he had a great year and a contract season, but that's one that I would have paid him if I'm being honest. I mean, uh, I don't know. I would have got not go investing a lot in safety, and if he wanted upwards of $10 million, but for that contract, I would have paid him. So, what are your thoughts on? I like what they've done with Clark and Lazard, and obviously if they land Rodgers, but outside of that, what do you think of Joe Douglas's free agency plan? Is this kind of what you expected, or are you underwhelmed?
I think I'm a little underwhelmed so far, but at the same time, I'm willing to be patient because there are still some good targets out there. For me, it's just I think you know you go after Rodgers, and it looks like he's coming. So you're committing to this quarterback who puts you in pretty clear all in win now mode. And I feel like there could be a little bit more sense of urgency with, trying to build a team that can win right now this year because that's what you're trying to do. I think you have to do everything you can to maximize your odds of winning this Super Bowl this year. And doesn't really feel like they've done that so far. But at the same time, like I said, there are still options out there who can fill some of the holes they have remaining. And I'm willing to be patient and see if they can fill some of them. And I trust that they will because I don't think the Jets are unaware of the issues that they have. I don't think they want to go into the season with Tony Adams as their leading free safety. And we like Tony Adams. We'll talk about him a little bit, but yeah, I don't think they're lacking in awareness of some of the issues and also the type of season they've chosen to pursue by um, getting in quotes Rodgers. So yeah, there are still some holes to fill, and it's been kind of unusual to see how slow it's been so far. But at the same time, this is a different Jets team, one that does not come into March with so many holes and so much cap space to where they're firing on all cylinders out of the gate in legal tampering. That's what we're used to seeing every year because the Jets are usually a terrible team that has a lot of money to spend and a lot of holes to fill. So they come out of the gates signing all these guys. And this year, they're not that team. The cap space is down because they spent a lot of it last year. They've got to re-sign Quinn Williams, and there aren't as many holes in the roster. There still are some, and there are important holes that need to be filled, but not as dire as okay, we need a top receiver, we need a top edge rusher, like needing everything on top corner. Like they had all these premium positions every year. I felt like they need to fill. Now a lot of those premium positions are filled. So it is a lot different in that regard. And it makes sense that the Jets aren't as uber aggressive as they have been in previous years. But at the same time, definitely still some more work to do, I think, if the Jets want to seriously compete for a championship.
Well, let's talk about some of those holes that remain. I think the one last thing to consider on that point is you look at the teams that have had a lot of success in free agency, and a lot of the success comes in the second and third waves. I mean, the bargain bin shopping, you can find some gems. I don't think this was the strongest free agency class too. I think that's another thing, and obviously the Jets cap restraints. But like you said, I think there's plenty of intriguing options out there. They've missed out on some guys, but Joe Douglas draws his line in the sand, and he's not gonna overpay for free agents, because that's where you really get yourself in trouble. Or at least I should, he actually has overpaid in the past for some guys, CJ Uzoma. But outside of that, I feel like the process this offseason makes sense. I would have maybe liked to see them go in on Gardner Johnson. But I like the depth they brought in the offensive line. We'll start there. There's plenty of holes, but I think it all starts up front, because all the excitement we have about this offense, it won't mean anything if they can't protect Rodgers and they can't run the football. Right tackle and center. And I mentioned last week, I actually think it was after the podcast, so I don't think I said it in the podcast. I felt that maybe they could have, actually I did say in the podcast that they could sign Isaac Seumalo, who ended up signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, because, look, AVT has tackle flexibility, and although he's probably best at guard, you look at the free agent pool, and Seumalo is the best offensive lineman available. And so if you want to get the best 5, maybe you sign him and you can bump AVT out to tackle. Obviously, that didn't happen. They brought the 2 depth guys in. There's still rumored to be in on Ben Jones. That was another report came out today, Sunday, that there's interest in potentially rekindling that, which could make a lot of sense. And then I mentioned a guy to you, and I know you put him in your article, but Cameron Fleming, who has been a swing tackle, mostly a backup. He bounced around the league, but last year he was Nathaniel Hackett's starting right tackle for quite a few games. He has both right tackle and left tackle versatility, and he had a pretty solid year. So, look, he's not Orlando Brown, but he should come fairly cheap. He's been durable. He has versatility. And I think if you were able to sign Ben Jones and Cameron Fleming, you put the Jets in a situation where there's not a massive hole on the offensive line entering the draft. They still need to hit the offensive line hard during the draft, but you're just in a different situation where if you don't sign a guy like Fleming, first of all, it sounds like Becton's playing left tackle this year, and Brown is Becton's insurance, assuming Brown stays on the team. Because, look, it's possible they could cut Brown post June 1st and free $10 million. The way they talk about him, probably not, but maybe restructure, who knows. But it sounds like Becton's your left tackle and Brown's your insurance there. At right tackle, you have Max Mitchell, who played all right last year. I think he did some good things, but still a rookie coming off a health situation, not necessarily sure what condition he's in. If he's been able to work out, if he's been able to lift, if he'll be able to be ready, that's a giant question mark. And then obviously Lakin was not good at all last year, but I expect to bounce back in a new system and, putting the pressure and maybe having Rodgers behind him yelling at him. But if you could go in with that Becton, Lakin, Ben Jones, AVT, Cameron Fleming offensive line, it gives you just a lot of breathing room. Gives you some comfort in the line, and then you have the depth of Mitchell and Brown and Schweitzer and Cologne. Then you could say, okay, at 13, let's take a tackle, and then he can compete with Cameron Fleming to start on the right side. And then, whether you give up your second round pick or you take a center in the third round, you could go attack center there and improve the interior and add some youth and create more of a pipeline on this offensive line. That's what I would do. I would sign Jones and Fleming and create a nice starting 5 that you could throw out there on an NFL field and feel good about, knowing that you have the depth of Brown and Mitchell and the 2 guys they brought in, and you're going to hit it hard in the draft. It's possible, though, that they just sign one of those guys. I do think one of those guys is going to be a Jet. Ben Jones is the one that's been linked, so he seems more likely. It's possible they just sign one of those guys and they chance it going into the draft, which you could do. But the fear with that is you don't know, first of all, if any of the top tackles are going to make it to 13, assuming you keep 13. You don't know if it's going to be the tackle you want. You might end up with a tackle who's, maybe gets injured or isn't ready to play right off the bat, or, is maybe more suited to play left tackle. And then you have that situation where Becton wants to play left tackle and he wants to play left tackle. It creates a lot of headaches if you don't fill the holes before the draft. So with that said, Michael, we'll get in some of the other holes, but offensive line is my primary concern with this team right now. There's ways to fix it. It's not time to panic, but how do you feel about the offensive line, and what would you do?
I think it all has to start with Ben Jones, because the starting center options have really dwindled, but he's still out there and he's a great option. Reigning Pro Bowler, and even before that, he was one of the best centers for many seasons, and this was actually one of his down seasons because he's 34 years old now. So it's almost like that Pro Bowl just kind of atones for him not making it in previous years. But regardless, he was still a good player last year. He had some concussion issues, missed a few games, also failed the physical. So there are concerns with age and the concussion stuff, but he was still very good last year when he played. I did watch a little bit of him as well, and the first thing I noticed was this guy's going to clean up some of that communication issues that we've seen with Connor McGovern, because I love McGovern's athleticism and run blocking, but he just never figured out. And part of this is quarterback, like we talked about earlier. But he just couldn't ever really fix that. Picking up stunts and blitzes, just too much of that up the middle. Ben Jones would fix that, and I think that would be huge to have. Not just a veteran quarterback under center, but also you put Ben Jones there. I think you'd have that's a really good set of veterans straight up the middle to keep everyone on the same page, all these guys across the O line and the whole line of scrimmage. I think that would really stabilize things. And also, he was with Matt LaFleur in Tennessee as well, so he has that connection, sort of that link to Hackett in that way. So yeah, I really like Ben Jones. I think he would solve that center issue and give you that placeholder until you get to the draft. So I would start with that. And then I think Cameron Fleming, like you said, is a really uh, interesting option to tackle, because I don't think he's a guy you sign like, if you got Orlando Brown or something like that, to where this is our starting tackle. He's an upgrade. But what he does give you is a guy who, in the worst case scenario, you can draft a tackle and Fleming has to start. He did an above average year last year. And he has right left versatility, has experience in Hackett's offense. Um, so I think he's a guy who, at worst, is a placeholder starter. You can do a lot worse then. And I think they would do worse right now with Dwayne Brown or Max Mitchell. That's just my opinion. I think Brown struggled last year, and I know he's playing through injuries, but at his age, it's not. It seems pretty likely he might have to continue fighting through injuries. And then with Max Mitchell, he's an unknown. So I think Fleming would be a minor upgrade over those guys. And if he's your backup swing tackle, he's an upgrade there. And like you said, he gives you that flexibility going into the draft of, we have a guy in place, we have bodies, and, you don't have to force that pick. You don't need to get, you're not going to the draft saying, this is how we're going to get our starter. And if you don't, then you're screwed. So I like the Fleming idea. So yeah, I
Is
think
there
Ben Jones and Cameron Fleming
is
would be a good pairing.
is there anybody else on the O line? Is that? I mean, I know those two guys make a lot of sense, and the connections to the coaching staff are obvious. But Isaiah Wynn from New England, who's had some injury issues and fell out of favor with that staff. Also, I don't think he performed too well at right tackle, but he has had some good games in his career. I mean, they could be interested in the reunion with Connor McGovern. I mean, the options are definitely thinning out. So I do feel like the Jets will at least bring in one of the two of Jones and Fleming, and very
They
probably.
are thinning out a little bit, and this is like we'll see what happens. Again, like I said, I'll be patient, but this is kind of where I'm starting to get a little skeptical of the offseason plan, because it's like, man, it's just we're at this point again. We're at this point right now. There are still some good options there to where they can salvage it. But what if you don't get Ben Jones? He goes somewhere else. You don't get Fleming. Like, the offensive line is in a really risky spot to where you're like one Becton injury away from basically just being last year's offensive line. And is that really what you want with Aaron Rodgers coming in? I know he would be able to accommodate for a lot of that with some of the things we said earlier, but you still want to protect your guy, your 40-year-old quarterback, as best as you possibly can. And you would be putting a lot of pressure on him with some of these things. So we'll see what happens. Still a little bit of time, still the draft to come. And based on last year's draft, Douglas deserves the opportunity to show that he can get some immediate contributors in the draft. So still plenty of time here to fill some of these holes and strengthens the supporting cast around Rodgers.
Right.
But you're like really running thin on options right now. So it's just right now we're kind of waiting to see what the plan is. I think that's what is kind of creating some anxiety for Jets fans, and for me a little bit is, right now it's just kind of hard to see what the vision is, because they've kind of let a lot of guys go off the board. So we're just waiting to see what the plan is to fill some of these positions that could use some help.
I think they're in a good spot if they can bring in Jones and Fleming and they hit it hard in the draft. But I agree. Let's go to some of the other holes and run through these, and we'll get out of here. Defensive tackle is probably the next one on the list. Pretty barren after Quinnen Williams. They brought back Solomon Thomas, who wasn't very good as the Jets' fourth defensive tackle last year, and right now he's their second defensive tackle. I know they have Tanzel Smart, Isaiah Mack, and there's one other guy. What's his name again?
Marcus Spencer.
Nice, thank you. I would imagine they're going to sign a defensive tackle. Connor Hughes just had a tweet that was talking about how the Jets thought they were going to get Fletcher Cox. They offered him a deal that they thought he'd accept until he announced he'd return to Philly. So clear they're in the market for a veteran defensive tackle. Calais Campbell makes a lot of sense. Michael, what do you think about that? And is there anybody else that could interest you in the market?
Calais Campbell makes a lot of sense. He's a. I know I just
You
repeated
repeat the
exactly
exact
what you
sentence.
said.
Yeah.
I was. Let me explain. I was in the process of looking up the free agent
Oh, I
defensive
can give you
tackle
some if you
list.
weren't ready. Poona Ford, Chris Wormley.
Okay, those are some good names. I
You have
just
any
wanted to
thoughts
bring.
on them?
So I was looking up the free agent list of defensive tackles. So I just repeated what you said. I wasn't really thinking
Okay.
about what was coming out of my mouth. So there's my
Yep.
explanation for that. Yeah, Campbell. I think his versatility would be something that appeals to them. Because he could play nose, he can kick out to three tech, really all over the line, even out to the edge he can play. Still a good pass rusher. I think he's a veteran guy who hasn't won a ring yet, so maybe he'd be interested in joining this type of team. Uh, Obviously, it would probably be a 1 year deal, so not a long term commitment for the Jets. Uh, so there's a lot of reasons I think that makes sense. And some of these other guys, Quentin Jefferson is a name that's interesting to me because he's a one of the top pass rushing defensive tackles. His run defense isn't known to be as good, but if the Jets really want to double down on pass rushing and just let's get after the quarterback, um, I think that makes a lot of sense. And this is a point that because I was talking to Joe Blewett and Kyle Smith recently. I asked them what they thought, what their opinions would be on adding that type of defensive tackle, like a pass rush first guy who's not great against the run. And they had a good point to where they were saying, the Jets have a chance this year to be playing with leads a lot more often than they have in recent years. So in that case, you could be facing a much higher pass run ratio from your opponents because they're going to be trailing more often. So in that case, maybe you do lean towards the pass rushing even more heavily than you have been. So Quentin Jefferson is interesting because, again, very good pass rusher. I would say, even be an upgrade over Rankins as a pass rusher. But the run defense would be the question, and I think that is probably the main thing I would be looking for in a defensive tackle. But he's someone to keep an eye on. Chris Wormley is a guy we've brought up a few times. I think he has good run stopping ability while being athletic. Couple other guys in here. Looking at the list, not a lot that stands
You
out
don't
to
like Poona
me.
Ford? I know he
I
did
think
not have
he's
a good year
interesting. Yeah,
last year. He didn't have a good year last year, but it was a switch in the defensive system. The year before that, and you look at his whole body of work, Ford had some good years. I mean, he's 27 from Seattle. I don't know. I think Campbell makes the most sense. I think he wants a ring, and he's going to give you those 5 sacks, and he fits well next to Quinnen. But so I think he's the obvious one. But Ford's interesting to me. The other thing I guess that we should mention too is it's possible, especially if they keep Carl Lawson, that maybe they play JFM a lot more inside, which is what we thought they were going to do last year. I mean, I really wasn't buying that JFM was going to be edge as much as he was, but they proved me wrong. I mean, he certainly was fantastic in the role that he's in, and not obviously we knew that he could do that, but you see the success that he has rushing from 3 tech, and you just figured, with the Jets drafting Jermaine Johnson and having Carl Lawson and Bryce Huff, and you figured that maybe that would be the starting 4. And considering that Rankins going into last year hadn't had a very good year. So I think it's possible that you see a lot more of JFM at defensive tackle on first and second down than you did last year, not just on third down. But if they could bring on a guy like Campbell, then I don't think you have to do that as much. I just think his versatility is going to come in huge. Also, Michael Clemens can do that as well. But if you are buying stock in Jermaine Johnson and you have Bryce Huff, and if you keep Carl Lawson, we'll see what happens there, and you want to have your best 4 out there, you might get a lot more of a JFM inside. The other free agent that they're rumored to be in on at the wide receiver position, well, there's 2. One that I think they'll sign in Randall Cobb, who makes too much sense with Aaron Rodgers, to replace Braxton Berrios. That seems like he should come on a veteran minimum deal. Can give you, he's a good route runner, safe pair of hands, has chemistry with Rodgers, knows the system, can return kicks and punts. That makes all the sense in the world. But OBJ still seems like they're in the market for OBJ. I mean, every tweet they're listed there. I know the Cowboys just traded for Brandon Cook, so maybe they're out of the OBJ sweepstakes. We haven't bought into it as much. It doesn't make as much sense for me. But then OBJ had that tweet where he said he disputed the report that he wanted 20 million, which is kind of what we have been talking about. Like, what do you want to pay this guy 15 million a year? We've seen this year a decrease in the wide receiver salaries for free agents. Teams are not paying wide receiver number twos the salaries that they were getting last year. When you look at Christian Kirk's contract last year, and it just looks even worse than it did at the time. I know he's a solid player, but just the number that he's getting paid compared to what the market is paying that level of receiver this time around, it's certainly different. And OBJ, he's a wide receiver one with talent, but obviously with the injury concerns, it's tough to label him as one. With the injury concerns, though, it doesn't seem like he's getting offered too much. I mean, that $4 million, I would imagine that's probably the guaranteed money, and that wouldn't surprise me if that was Douglas. We know Rodgers likes him. The fit is tough. If they're trading more, it makes more sense. But, if you're going all in, I guess you could really go for it and have Lazard and Wilson and OBJ and more. I'm really buying stock in the Elijah Moore breakout next year. And I just think bringing in an injury prone veteran who, might cause some problems in the locker room. I don't know. But if you can get him for cheap, he's a damn good football player. I'm not trying to, and he's added a significant amount of muscle mass, so maybe he's improved as a run blocker. What do you think about the OBJ rumors? I know we talked about it last week, but has your opinion on him shifted at all? I know he'd be exciting. I can't lie. If I saw the tweet that said the Jets have agreed to terms with OBJ, you'll get that reaction that you're talking about that only Thomas Morstead could bring out of you. But before he's a Jet and we're being objective about it, is that the wisest way to spend the cap space? I'm not sure.
I'm on the same page with you. Like, if they get him, will be exciting. Like, will we spend the next 5 months looking at these lineups of the Jets and being like, we got OBJ, we got Wilson, we got Moore, like, and just all these cool edits people are going to put out there because he really looks good in a Jets jersey. You want to talk about guys who look good in a Jets jersey in the edits? He definitely looks good, although he can't wear the 13 because of Don Maynard.
We're
But
3.
yeah,
He'll take Whitehead's number.
that'd be great. I think that'd be a great look on him. So yeah, I can't lie to you and say it wouldn't be exciting, but right now we're in the mode of this player is not on the Jets yet, so we can speak about him truly objectively. And while we're in this mode, I'm just not on board with this idea. I I'm with you. I buy into the Elijah Moore breakout. I look at the route running last year and the separation and some of the throws he was missed on. I'm like, just give this guy Rodgers and he's going to be really, really good. And we look at some of the other holes they have, and like, I know Chauncey Gardner-Johnson just went off the board, but I'm thinking, like, if we're going to give Odell whatever it is you give him, wouldn't you rather sign safety for that money, center, defensive tackle? If it's equal, because maybe you can get both. But all things being equal, would I rather have Odell or a similarly valued player at a different position? I would definitely take the other position. You mentioned like locker room issues are potentially part of it. That's another risk. But I don't know. I think there's just a lot more name brand value to Beckham than actual production, because there's the injury concerns. There's the fact that he's going to be 31 this year. And then you look at his production, and he just hasn't been the guy you think of when you hear his name since 2019, really. It's been a long
He
time
had the
since he's
playoff
been.
run with the
He did
Rams.
it.
He
The
was
playoff run
unguardable in
was
that
great.
Super Bowl before he tore his ACL.
Undoubtedly, the playoff run was great for sure, but it still was only 4 games. A great environment with a good quarterback, great offensive line, great coach. Cooper Kupp is the number one,
Well,
and
he'd be in a pretty good environment in New York too.
that's what I was just gonna say. It could be a good environment with the Jets as well. And like you said, if like he's claiming he got offered $4 million a year, so say you get him for like 6 to 8 million a year or something like that, and you do just go all in and say, you know what, just how about we have Odell and more, or say you do trade Elijah Moore, and then Odell just takes that second spot for an affordable price. I don't know. There are avenues here where you can look at it and see a potential path to this working, especially if he is going to be as affordable as it looks like he might be. But just thinking about it logically, I would really like to just commit to the young guys who the Jets have and have shown potential, and allocate the resources elsewhere. That's how I feel about it right now. But there is exciting potential to it. And I really don't want to buy into this stuff too much, but the muscle he's put on You have to be impressed by that. It's definitely a new element to his game. Maybe he has a little more contested catchability, even more than he used to have. So he did look impressive if that
Could
worked
make it
out,
more
but
likely he gets injured.
that's also true. But
I don't. Some people
he
would
looked
argue.
impressive.
Some
I don't
people would
want to buy
argue.
into it
You
though.
know, some people would argue with the strength training. You know, you strengthen the tendons, you strengthen your body. You're bigger, you're less likely to get injured. But then also, you've seen it a few times. And I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head. But of guys who add a significant amount of muscle mass. We talked about it a lot with Zach Wilson when he got injured in the preseason. When you add a significant amount of muscle mass in a short amount of time, and you're back out there in the NFL football field making hard cuts. I mean, he's had some time to add it over the course of a year and a half, 2 years. So maybe it's different, but when you add muscle in a short period of time like that, and you're cutting hard on those joints, and they're not used to carrying the extra weight, you could be more likely to re-injure, especially a guy has multiple knee surgeries. The other holes they have, I mean, we talked about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Free safety is one of them. I'm curious to see what they do there. I do really like Tony Adams. I think that it's possible that they, give him a real chance to compete for that starting job. I find it hard to believe that Whitehead will make this team. I feel like Whitehead's going to be cut. The $7 million that they could get from cutting him makes sense. I mean, Kevin Byard, it's rumored that he might want to be cut from Tennessee. I don't know if they're going to go in on a safety, but if they can get him the fact that they didn't want to pay Gardner Johnson $6.5 million guaranteed signals to me that they're not going to really go in on the safety market here. So I wouldn't expect Byard. Maybe they go cheap on a guy like, I know you don't really like him, but Adrian Amos was good at one point in his career. Wasn't very good the last few years. There's what's his name? John Johnson. There you go. I got it. They could bring him in. But I think probably it's either a cheap veteran or draft and somebody to compete with Tony Adams is what I would say at free safety. A linebacker, I mean, at this point, it does seem like the Jets could maybe get Quan Alexander back and bring back the linebacker group that they had last year. Is there anybody else at linebacker you like? Do you think it's more and more likely that Quan returns?
It's starting to look like it. I mean, I thought he would go in that first wave and get a starting role, but he's still out there. And I don't know what teams are seeing because, I mean, he was really good last year. So we'll see what happens. It was definitely coming into the offseason something I would have liked to have seen the Jets pull off. I just didn't think it was likely. But at this point, maybe it happens.
He's well liked in the locker room, and maybe he would take a bit of a cheaper price to go in for a Super Bowl on a place that he knows. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if there's no other starting opportunities out there, maybe he does come back. So I'd like that. And then safety, like you said, maybe this is a position where they just, end up relying on the draft, relying on Tony Adams, because, and we talked about this before, but you can't always fill every single hole. And especially with the way things are shaking out for the Jets right now, feels like they're just going to have to, play a little bit cheaper somewhere on this roster, and maybe free safety is the position you do that. And it's an important position, but if you're ranking the importance of every offensive and defensive position, it's probably lower, near the bottom in terms of which ones are the most important.
especially
The
with the
Jets,
corners the Jets have.
right? It's what I was going to say is like you have all that cornerback talent, and I'm confident in Chuck Clark as the strong safety. They do have talent back there that can help cover for that a little bit. So, and I like Tony Adams, what he showed at the end of the season. Small sample, but some of the hits he was making, the ankles he was taking to make them, it was really impressive. And he made the team as an undrafted free agent. Got playing time, even over Ashton Davis, who they drafted with a third-round pick. So, I think I like Adams. Maybe this is a position where they say, you know what, let's go with our guy and give him a chance. I'm not saying I would prefer that because I did say earlier in this podcast, like,
He
let's
flashed.
not go into the season with Tony Adams as our
Flashed.
starter. But maybe a guy like John Johnson is I like John Johnson. Is if we're looking at veteran free safeties who are still available, he's probably my favorite to hold the fort down and provide competition.
So entering this week, hopefully we get the Rodgers trade and we have a better understanding of the compensation. But we would say the last remaining holes in the Jets, and granted they can fill these through free agency or the draft, it would be right tackle, defensive tackle, safety, free safety, linebacker, receiver, and then you could maybe throw in like running back could maybe be thrown in there because you don't know how Brees Hall will be coming off of injuries. Donovan Knight flashed a little bit but trailed off towards the end of the year. Michael Carter was unimpressive last year, but that is a position that you want to talk about positions that you can ignore, the 49ers just plug in an undrafted free agent every year who has success. So that is a position that they could just wait till the draft or sign somebody and be okay with, I think. But outside of that, not too many holes. I mean, they definitely need to fill the holes in the trenches. The thing that was interesting was Alan Lazard's contract only has a $3 million cap hit this year. So they're clearly, and then you factor in that Corey Davis is still in the cap, Jordan Whitehead's still in the cap, Carl Lawson's still in the cap. They have space to make a move, and the free agent market is dwindling, but maybe if you're really going all in, maybe there's some trades out there that we haven't thought about that they could go after to attack some of these positions. Also, you're freeing up this cap. Maybe they do keep Carl Lawson. I think as much as you would say he's not worth the 15 million based off his production last year, the Jets pass rush with him is definitely better, and it's always a good thing to have pass rushers and to keep them fresh. And you got him and Jermaine and Clemens and Bryce Huff, and you could really have a dangerous pass rush with Quinnen inside and John Franklin Myers, and if you bring in a Calais Campbell, so maybe freeing up the space. They were freeing it up to maybe go in on a guy like Brendel or Orlando Brown, but if they can't, they just pivot and say, you know what, let's just keep our 2021 free agent signing in Carl Lawson and hope that another year off the Achilles surgeries, the 2 Achilles surgeries that he had, he's going to be the better player, a better player than he was last year. He was still a damn good player. It's just, was he a $15 million player? Maybe not, but certainly was worth that contract when the Jets signed him, and certainly seemed like he was going to be worth that contract in training camp in 2021 before his injury. So very curious to see what the Jets do with the cap space that they have. They are cap strapped, but there's a lot of ways to make room here. I think they have, if I'm looking over the cap, they have 11 million right now with the guys they've signed. And if they cut Corey Davis and Jordan Whitehead, they'd be at 29 million. And then you add another 15 if they cut Carl Lawson. So they have room here to make some big moves. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is going to take at least 15 million of that. And then, whatever other moves they make. But they certainly have some flexibility here. I would keep an eye on the trade market. The Jets seem to be going all in. Joe Douglas is a very frugal decision maker. I like a lot of the moves they've made, but I agree. They got to attack the offensive line this week. I'll feel a lot better if they can bring in a Ben Jones and a Cameron Fleming. Last thing, Michael, before we get out of here, predictions for this week. Who do we think they sign?
Ben Jones, definitely. Brian Costello had the post that they're reportedly interested, so there is some traction there.
Okay.
Is there any? I'm sorry. You know what? I'm gonna make a potentially bold prediction. Maybe it's not bold, but I just have a feeling that Odell Beckham's gonna happen. That's just my hunch.
Really?
I think the Cowboys are out of it now with Brandon Cooks. I saw I forget who it was, but ESPN reporter for the Giants said that the Giants aren't interested in Beckham, or I think he said they're out of the stakes because they re-signed the sweepstakes because they re-signed Sterling Shepard. So it seems like teams are starting to drop out a little bit. Jets continue to be mentioned. Odell saying that, revealing that his price is maybe more affordable than we thought. I feel like it's kind of going to happen.
I think it's smoke. I mean, I don't know. There are a lot of people reporting it. It just,
I guess it depends on the odds that I'd be taking here. Like, would I take him if it's like just you get back what you bet? Probably not. But if it's like maybe 5-1 odds, something like that,
I mean,
maybe I would
the
bet
amount
on
of
him for that.
The amount of people reporting it and the fact that Rodgers is interested, likes him and he likes Rodgers, I could see it. It just, for me, I don't know. If I'm going to make predictions, I'm going to say this. I'm going to give you 5 signings. I don't know if they all happen this week, but here are my 5 predictions for the rest of Jets free agency. Are you ready? And I think you would agree with all of them. We've mentioned all these players, but I'm going to say Ben Jones at center, Cameron Fleming at right tackle, Randall Cobb as receiver number 4, Calais Campbell at defensive tackle, and I think they bring back Quan Alexander. And I think that rounds out the Jets free agency. I think they make the trade for Aaron Rodgers, and they can take that roster into the draft. Hit offensive line heavy in the draft. Definitely want to draft another tackle. You could maybe draft another center as well with the injury issues. But, with Ben Jones and Cologne, you could maybe not. If you part with that second round pick, you're not going to be in that prime position to land one of those top centers. But, somebody should be there in the 3rd round. And then in the draft as well, you want to attack defensive tackle. You could bring in depth at receiver, depth in the secondary. But I think if they could sign Jones, Campbell, Cobb, Fleming, and Quan, the roster's in a damn good place. And I think they'll move on. I think they'll trade Corey Davis. I think they'll cut Jordan Whitehead. And I think Carl Lawson's going to be on this team. I'm starting to get the sense that Carl Lawson's going to be a New York Jet for one more year, which is exciting. I would hope that maybe he would take a bit of a pay cut or maybe a restructure or something. But, you think about the Jets trying to go all in this year. He certainly makes the pass rush a hell of a lot better. And
He'll be motivated. It's a contract.
He'll be motivated. It is a contract year. So with that being said, Michael, let's get out of here. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter, myself at Ben W. Blessington, Michael _Nania. Go to jetsxfactor.com, best place to go for Jets content. Subscribe to the Jets X Factor YouTube. We post all the podcasts there, and all the other podcasts are posted there. If you can on iTunes, please rate, review, subscribe. That helps out the podcast a ton. I think that's it. Michael, any last thoughts?
So I think last time we talked about our proposed plan for the home uniforms, right?
You want to give the anybody who missed that your proposal? Our proposal, sure. I should say. I did mention it last year.
Yes, this is collaborative. So we're thinking that they should wear, because last season they barely wore green anyway. They only wore the green jerseys one time the whole season, the Detroit game. So we're thinking, make the black jerseys the primary home. Introduce
that was the sound of jerseys. All the Boomer Jets fans groaning.
If they are still listening. So we're going to make the black jerseys the home primary, but this will get you guys back in. We're going to introduce green throwback jerseys. We're going to wear those 3 times at home. 80s throwbacks. So that's where you're getting your green jersey fix, and that's 3 times more than last season. But black mainly at home.
You're ditching, just to be clear, you're ditching the black helmet, though, because you can only have one alternate helmet.
Yes.
Okay.
We're ditching black helmet.
You could try to keep the green helmet and change the face mask, and then change the sticker out. I don't know, but I like that. Go with the black jerseys, and you can mix and match them with the white and green pants. You got 3 games of that, 3 games of white on white, and then 3 throwback.
No white on black at home.
You could go 2 white on white, one white on black.
And also here's another question for the black jerseys. Do you want to see any experimentation with black jerseys, green pants, black jerseys, white pants?
Yes, I just said that. Yeah, I just did. Yeah.
You just said that?
Yeah, I think it'd look good with the green pants, but
Okay, I'm sorry. My attention just completely. We're talking about uniforms, and somehow I'm not paying attention. I'm really declining.
I know our 3 listeners who love the uniform segments are riding high right now.
Which one do you think would be better?
What do you mean? Between
black and green, or black and white?
Black on green.
Black and green.
Yeah.
Especially with green helmets, I think it would be pretty good.
Look pretty cool. You know what these uniforms are going to look freaking amazing with?
Aaron Rodgers
in them and winning football games. That's the best way to make a uniform look cool, is win some football games. And I bet you the opinion on these Jets uniforms are going to go up a lot this year. Just like they went up a little bit this year when they started to win in them. They started to wash the gay stink off of them. I think they're going to go up a little bit more this year. But I think, they could probably tweak them next year, change them a little bit, go back to that 80s logo. But at the very least, I just want to see the 80s throwbacks for a few times this season. That's all I really care about. If we're going to settle for any uniform stuff in this podcast, please, Woody, give us some throwback jerseys this season. It'd be awesome. All right.
If he's not number 12, what number do you want to see?
10. Put him in Pennington or 16 for Vinny.
16.
I like 16 could work, because we've had experience with an older veteran quarterback wearing 16.
It just kind of reminds me of Flacco too much.
Flacco's 19.
It's an upside down. I know it's an upside down.
Flacco
9.
All right, 10 would work too. Pennington days, and it looks good.
I think 8 would be good, but Elijah Moore already has that down.
Yeah,
because 8 was his college number.
Well, yeah, Elijah
Moore. How about 6?
Sanchez?
Yeah.
No, that'd be like half of what he was in Green Bay. I don't like that. I like 10. All right, that'll do it for us. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great week. Let's hope this Rodgers situation is settled by the next time we do a podcast. We will do a podcast as soon as the compensation's announced. Hopefully that's this week. Other than that, we have some other podcasts planned. We have a friend of the podcast presumably coming up soon. That should be scheduled this week. So be on the lookout for that. We're very excited about our new guest. Should we give any hints? We should wait for it till it's confirmed before we.
No hints.
No hints. But we do have a friend of the podcast in the works. So thank you everybody for listening. Have a great week. Go Jets.